Right now, as you watch this, a football field of Louisiana is disappearing into the Gulf of Mexico. Not today, not this hour. Every single 100 minutes, and it never stops. Louisiana's coastline is vanishing at a rate that has scientists calling it one of the worst land loss crises on the entire planet. The ground itself is sinking, 3 centimeters every single year, swallowing communities, wildlife, and entire ways of life that took thousands of years to build. 1,900 square miles, already gone, forever. But here is the part that nobody is talking about. The very river that created Louisiana, that literally built it from the ground up over thousands of years, is now the reason it is being erased. And the system humans built to control that river, it made everything worse. There are families who have already lost their homes to the water, fishermen watching their livelihoods sink beneath the waves, and engineers racing against the clock with a plan so bold it could either save the coast or destroy what little is left of it. Can Louisiana be saved? Or are we already too late? Louisiana is not slowly disappearing. It is being erased at a speed that should terrify every single person in this country. Since the 1930s, Louisiana has lost 1,900 square miles of land. Not beach erosion, not a few feet of shoreline trimmed back by the tide. Entire landmasses, gone. Swallowed by the Gulf of Mexico without a single headline. To put that in terms you can feel, that is the equivalent of losing Iberia, St. Martin, and St. Mary parishes combined, wiped completely off the map within a single human lifetime. And it is accelerating. The Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority has run the numbers on what happens if Louisiana stays on its current path. Their projection is almost impossible to accept. Another 4,000 square miles lost over the next 50 years. That is Lafayette Parish gone, Vermilion Parish gone, Acadia, Jeff Davis, and Cameron parishes, all of them consumed by water that was never supposed to be there. Communities where people were born, raised families, and buried their grandparents, reduced to open gulf. The football field statistic sounds almost too dramatic to be real. But it is real, and it is relentless. Every 100 minutes, around the clock, through the night, through every holiday and every season, another football field of Louisiana land collapses beneath the water. That is 14 football fields every single day. Nearly 5,000 every year. The math never stops working against Louisiana. Beneath the surface, the ground itself is betraying the people standing on it. Louisiana's coastline is sinking at roughly 3 centimeters every year, one of the most severe land subsidence rates recorded anywhere on Earth. The soil compacts naturally as organic material breaks down underneath it. Oil and gas extraction has pulled support from below. Groundwater withdrawal has accelerated the collapse. And the result is a coastline that is not just being eaten from the sides by the Gulf, but actively dropping from underneath, meeting the rising water halfway. The cruelest part of this equation is the mathematics of what is no longer arriving. Healthy marshland needs a constant supply of fresh river sediment to grow vertically and keep pace with rising water. Without it, the marsh drowns slowly, then suddenly. And for nearly a century now, that sediment has not been arriving. The mechanism that built this coast over thousands of years has been cut off. What took millennia to create is being undone in decades. The bottom line is brutal and simple. Louisiana's coast is disappearing fast. The land that generations called home is running out, and the clock has never been ticking louder. To understand why Louisiana is vanishing, you have to go back to the beginning. Long before there were cities, highways, or levee walls stretching for hundreds of miles along the riverbank, the Mississippi River was doing something remarkable. It was building an entire state from scratch. Every spring, for thousands of years, the river did what rivers do. It flooded. It spilled over its banks and spread across the lowlands in great shallow sheets of brown water. And when that water finally receded, it left something behind: sediment. Layer after layer, year after year, deposited across the floodplains and wetlands of southern Louisiana. The river was not just passing through the land, it was building it. That sediment built the marshes. It built the barrier islands. It built the soil that families would one day farm, and the ground that communities would one day call home. The entire geography of coastal Louisiana, every single square mile of it, is the product of thousands of years of the Mississippi River doing exactly what nature designed it to do: overflow, deposit, build, repeat. Then humans decided to take control. The levee system lining the Mississippi today was built with legitimate and urgent purpose. The same flooding that had shaped Louisiana for millennia was also devastating to the people trying to live alongside it. Towns were destroyed, crops were wiped out, lives were lost. The Army Corps of Engineers constructed an enormous network of levees and flood walls designed to keep the river contained, protect communities, and make the Mississippi reliable enough to support commerce and agriculture at an industrial scale. It worked exactly as designed. The flooding stopped. The river stayed locked within its channel. And the sediment that had spent thousands of years building Louisiana's coast stayed locked inside that same channel too, carried straight past the shrinking marshes and dumped uselessly into the deep water of the Gulf of Mexico, where it could do absolutely nothing for the coastline slowly starving without it. The moment the levees went up, the deterioration began. That is not an opinion. It is exactly what happened. Whatever existed along that coast was the product of an uninterrupted natural cycle stretching back further than any recorded history. The second that cycle was severed, the coast stopped growing. And a coast that stops growing in a place where the ground is sinking and the sea is rising does not stay the same. It simply disappears. The engineering meant to protect Louisiana quietly set in motion the very crisis now consuming it. The river did not betray this land. The decisions humans made about the river did, and the coast has been paying for those decisions ever since. There is a place in Terrebonne Parish called Isle de Jean Charles, a narrow strip of land, barely wide enough to hold a road, stretching out into the Gulf, surrounded by water on every side. The people who grew up there describe it the way you would describe a dream: quiet, beautiful. A small paradise where you could turn off the rest of the world the moment you crossed onto the island. A place completely unlike anywhere else on Earth. Today, that place is almost entirely gone. At its peak, Isle de Jean Charles was home to around 600 people. Families rooted there for generations, primarily of Native American tribal ancestry, who built their entire lives on that thin strip of Louisiana coastline. They fished the bayous. They crabbed the surrounding waters. They raised children and buried elders in the same soil their grandparents had worked before them. The land was not just where they lived, it was who they were. Then the water started winning. The bayous that families once fished and crabbed are now stagnant drainage ditches, choked and disconnected from the living marsh that once surrounded them. The trees along the island's edges stand dead and gray, their roots drowned by saltwater intrusion that creeps further inland every single year. Roads that were passable a decade ago vanish beneath storm surge now with regularity. Where there was once solid ground, there is open water. Where there was open water, there is now gulf. Today, only about a dozen families remain on Isle de Jean Charles. In 2016, the community received something that had never been awarded to any community in American history: a federal resettlement grant, the first of its kind in the United States, to help residents relocate further north, away from land that the government officially acknowledged would not exist much longer. America's first climate refugees, not a designation anyone asked for. Some families have already made the move, relocating roughly 30 miles north to Homa.
But even in that place, the water still finds its way in. With every storm, even the smallest one, the waterline moves a bit higher and inches a little closer. The gap that once felt secure is slowly disappearing. The people who have witnessed Al Dijon Charles fading away before their very eyes are not reacting with anger as some might assume. Instead, they are mourning.
Grieving. They tried to ring the alarm bell for years, walking the rest of the country through what was happening to their home, hoping someone further north would finally pay attention. Isle de Jean Charles is not a cautionary tale about what could happen to coastal Louisiana. It is the proof of what already has. And dozens of communities just like it are watching the same water rise. The ground beneath Louisiana is not just being swallowed by water from above. It is collapsing from below. And the science behind that collapse is both precise and deeply unsettling. Louisiana's coastline sinks at approximately 3 centimeters every single year. That number sounds small until you understand what it means, compounded across decades, across hundreds of miles of coastline, across a landscape that is already barely above sea level to begin with. Scientists who study coastal subsidence globally rank Louisiana among the most severely affected regions on the entire planet. The land is not gradually adjusting. It is in free fall by geological standards, and the forces driving that collapse are coming from multiple directions simultaneously. The first force is natural. Organic rich soils compact over time as plant material breaks down underneath the surface. In a healthy, functioning delta, the Mississippi River's annual sediment deposits would offset that natural compaction, continuously adding new material to replace what was lost below. Without that sediment supply, there is nothing to counteract the collapse. The ground simply keeps sinking with nothing arriving to rebuild it. The second force is human-made and far more aggressive. Decades of oil and gas extraction across coastal Louisiana pulled enormous volumes of material from beneath the surface, removing the underground support structure that the land above depended on. Groundwater withdrawal compounded the damage, draining aquifers and allowing the soil layers above to compress into the resulting voids. Every well drilled into Louisiana's subsurface quietly accelerated the rate at which its coastline was dropping. Sea level rise turns both of those forces into something catastrophic. Even modest increases in Gulf water levels become devastating when the land itself is simultaneously sinking to meet the water halfway. Scientists describe it as a double compression, the water rising from below sea level while the ground descends to greet it. The effective rate of relative sea level rise in parts of coastal Louisiana is among the highest recorded anywhere on Earth. Satellite data and LiDAR mapping technology now allow scientists to track this collapse in extraordinary detail, measuring elevation changes across the coastline year by year, sometimes inch by inch. The maps produced by that monitoring are striking in the worst possible way. Large sections of coastal Louisiana that existed as dry land within living memory now register as open water on the latest surveys. The most dangerous element of this crisis is the feedback loop it creates. As marshland disappears, the natural buffer protecting inland areas from storm surge vanishes with it. Storm surge then penetrates deeper inland, killing more marsh vegetation, accelerating further erosion, and widening the open water that the next storm will push even further. The cycle feeds itself, and right now, nothing is breaking it. Inside the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority headquarters in Baton Rouge, engineers are working on something that has never been attempted at this scale anywhere in the world. They are building a system designed to make the Mississippi River do what it used to do naturally, feed sediment back into the dying marshes, and rebuild a coastline that a century of human engineering accidentally destroyed. The concept is called sediment diversion. Using physical scale models of the Mississippi River, CPRA engineers simulate exactly where diverted water and sediment would flow, how it would spread across the bays, and how much new marsh it could realistically build over time. The goal is to cut engineered channels into the riverbank, install massive gate structures, and redirect a controlled flow of Mississippi River water, carrying its load of sediment and nutrients, back out into the deteriorating coastal bays where it is desperately needed. The 2000
and the other focused on Biddaria Bay in the west. Together, these projects form the most ambitious coastal restoration initiative ever attempted in the United States. Water moving through these diversion channels would transport sediment into the open bays, spreading it across the seafloor and slowly creating new marshland from the ground up. Engineers describe the process as recreating a natural delta, essentially restarting the geological cycle that the levees once halted. The outlook from these projections is genuinely optimistic. Models indicate that over several decades, successful diversions could produce thousands of acres of new wetlands, reduce the rapid loss of land, and provide coastal communities with a real chance to withstand the rising Gulf waters.
But the engineers are careful with their language. They are not promising to restore what Louisiana has already lost. Nearly 1,900 square miles of vanished land is not coming back. What the diversions could do is stop the bleeding, rebuild a functional buffer, and buy Louisiana the time it needs to adapt. The Mississippi built this coast once before. The question is whether it can be persuaded to build it again. Not everyone in Louisiana is cheering for the diversion plan. For thousands of people whose entire lives are built on the waters of Barataria Bay, the proposed solution carries its own devastating consequences. And the conflict it has created cuts right to the heart of what it actually means to save a coastline. The problem is salinity. The marshes and bays of coastal Louisiana are not just bodies of water. They are precisely balanced ecosystems, where the mix of fresh and salt water determines what lives, what breeds, and what survives. Redirect a massive flow of Mississippi River fresh water into Barataria Bay, and that balance shifts dramatically. For creatures that can swim, the adjustment is difficult. For oysters, which cannot move an inch from the beds where they are anchored, it can be a death sentence. Ralph Pulsena, president of the Louisiana Oyster Dealers and Growers Association, grew up in an oyster family. He spent decades on the water before the writing on the wall became too clear to ignore. The projected flow path of the Barataria diversion runs directly through waters where generations of oystermen have held their leases. Those leaseholders are not facing minor disruption. They are facing complete destruction of the beds their families have worked for generations, with no guarantee of recovery on the other side. Shrimpers are watching just as closely. Barataria Bay produces brown shrimp found nowhere else in Louisiana, species whose abundance is directly tied to the bay's current salinity profile. Change the water, and you change everything those fishermen depend on. The CPRA has held meetings with the seafood industry and Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries, attempting to find middle ground between the urgent need for restoration and the legitimate survival concerns of people already living on the economic edge. Those conversations remain unresolved. The brutal truth at the center of this conflict is that there may be no version of saving the Louisiana coast that does not ask someone to sacrifice something irreplaceable. The land is disappearing, but so is a way of life, and right now, nobody has found a way to save both. Louisiana thinks it is fighting a local battle. It is not. What is happening along the Gulf Coast is a warning being broadcast to every coastal nation on Earth, and most of the world is not yet listening closely enough. River deltas are disappearing globally. The Nile Delta in Egypt, the Mekong Delta in Vietnam, the Ganges-Brahmaputra system in Bangladesh. Every major delta on the planet shares the same fundamental vulnerability as Louisiana: sediment-starved coastlines, sinking ground, and rising seas converging into a slow-motion catastrophe that accelerates with every passing decade. Louisiana is simply further along the curve than almost anywhere else, which makes it the most advanced real-world laboratory for what the rest of the world is about to face. The national stakes extend far beyond sentiment and culture. Louisiana's coastline shields energy infrastructure responsible for roughly 20% of domestic United States energy supply. The shipping lanes running through its waters connect the American interior to global markets. The ports handling cargo for the entire country sit behind a coastal buffer that is shrinking by a football field every 100 minutes. This is not just Louisiana's crisis. It is a national infrastructure emergency wearing a regional disguise. Decades of federal inaction allowed a manageable problem to become an existential one. Restoration funding arrived late, underfunded, and politically contested at every stage. The result is a timeline compressed almost beyond recovery, with engineers now attempting in years what should have been addressed over generations. Climate change has tightened that timeline further. Sea level rise projections that once felt distant are arriving ahead of schedule, adding pressure to a coastline already collapsing under its own weight. The window for effective intervention is not closing. In places, it has already closed. Isle de Jean-Charles did not ask to become a symbol, but it became one anyway. Proof of where delayed action leads. Proof of what a community looks like when the water finally wins. Louisiana is not the end of this story. It is the beginning of a global reckoning that the rest of the world has not yet admitted is already underway. Go back to Isle de Jean-Charles one more time. Picture the last dozen families still holding on to that narrow strip of land, surrounded by water on every side, living inside what they describe as a small paradise that the rest of the world forgot to save. The dead trees standing at the water's edge, the bayous that used to feed entire families now sit silent and stagnant. The road that disappears under storms surge a little more completely with every passing season. They saw this coming decades ago. They walked officials through what was happening, pointed at the waterline, described what was being lost, and asked for help. For years, the response was insufficient. By the time America officially acknowledged Isle de Jean-Charles as a community that could not be saved, most of it was already gone. That is the pattern Louisiana keeps repeating. The warning arrives long before the crisis becomes undeniable. The action arrives long after the damage becomes irreversible. And somewhere in the gap between those two moments, land disappears, communities dissolve, and ways of life that took generations to build get quietly erased by water that was never supposed to be there. The engineers in Baton Rouge are still fighting. The diversion projects are still moving forward, still contested, still carrying the genuine hope that the Mississippi River can be coaxed into rebuilding what a century of engineering accidentally destroyed. That fight is real, and it matters enormously. But even if everything goes perfectly, Louisiana will never recover what it has already lost. The 1,900 square miles are gone.
The families who moved away are now spread out in different places. The communities that were swallowed by the Gulf will never return. What remains now is a decision to make. It's the same decision Louisiana has been pushing the nation to face for decades, and one the rest of the world is only starting to realize it must confront as well. Take action early at a massive cost with uncertain results, or wait until later and face a far greater disaster when there are no options left. A football field of land disappears every 100 minutes. The clock isn't waiting for the choice to become simple.